If you've never budgeted before, the most important thing you need to understand is this. Budgeting is not about restriction, it is about freedom. Most people think budgeting is just simple math. Income minus expenses equals whatever is left. But that definition misses the deeper point. Budgeting is the art of aligning finite resources with infinite desires. Your wants will always exceed your money. The budget is the only system that forces you to face this reality. Ancient thinkers once called this household management, but in modern psychology it's considered a commitment device, meaning it locks you into protecting yourself from your own future mistakes. The human brain doesn't treat money rationally. When you get paid, your mind magnifies the amount. You feel richer than you actually are. This is what's called cognitive bias, a mental trick. That's why $500 feels like a fortune on Friday, yet is gone by Monday. Without a budget, money naturally drifts toward what's called conspicuous consumption, spending to look good, to display status, rather than to secure life. A budget works like a pair of corrective glasses. It forces you to see money as it is, not as your brain imagines it. The reason people hate budgeting has little to do with math. It is psychological. Scarcity, the feeling of not having enough, shrinks your mental bandwidth. It makes you want to avoid facing the truth. Budgeting feels like standing in front of a mirror, and mirrors can be uncomfortable. That's why people write budgets as punishment lists. No coffee, no eating out, no fun. But that never lasts, because humans need balance. A sustainable budget mixes hedonic consumption, spending on joy, with utilitarian consumption, spending on necessity. Cut out all joy, and your budget will collapse in rebellion. There are many ways to budget, each with its own logic. One common method is the idea that half your income goes to needs, some to wants, and the rest to savings. It looks neat. But for many people struggling with high costs of living, needs alone swallow almost everything, leaving the formula broken. Another approach is called zero-based budgeting, where every dollar is given a purpose so none is left floating. This is powerful for accountability, though it can feel suffocating if you treat it as rigid law. Then, there's the envelope method, where money is split into separate categories, either with cash or digitally, so you physically see the depletion and stop overspending. A different version is the so-called anti-budget. You automate savings and bills first, then spend the rest however you like. This appeals to people who hate micromanaging but only works if you resist lifestyle inflation. Despite their differences, all methods come back to the same core principle, conscious allocation of resources. Think of budgeting as a form of time travel. Every dollar you spend today is a vote for or against your future self. That daily $5 coffee is not just a coffee. Over a year, it becomes almost $2,000. If that same amount were invested and allowed to grow for decades, it could transform into hundreds of thousands. Budgeting forces you to see this chain reaction, making the invisible visible. There's also a myth that wealthy people don't budget. In reality, they simply budget differently. Instead of worrying about groceries, they think in terms of asset allocation. How much for investments, how much for real estate, how much for cash, how much for risks. Their budget is about directing surplus, not controlling scarcity. And this difference matters. If your budget only addresses survival, you remain stuck in survival. If it includes, even in the smallest way, investment for the future, you build a path out. What few realize is that budgeting is not just financial, it's philosophical. It teaches values. Every line in your budget is a reflection of what you care about, whether you prize experiences over objects or security over entertainment. A budget is essentially an ethical document. It is a written statement of your priorities. So how do you start, if you've never done it before? Begin simply. First, track your spending for 1 month. Don't plan, just record. You can't control what you don't measure. Then, group your spending into categories: needs, wants, savings, and debt. Notice which category dominates. Next, choose a framework. If you feel overwhelmed, use a simple percentage rule, but adjust it to your own reality. Then automate savings so you protect your future self before you spend on today. Build in rewards so you don't resent the process. Review your budget every month because life changes. Income shifts, goals shift, even prices shift. Above all, shift your mindset. A budget isn't a punishment. It's your personal constitution, a living document that protects you from chaos. When you begin to think of budgeting not just as a ledger of income and expenses but as a living philosophy, it becomes clear that the act itself is less about cutting back and more about organizing life around intentionality. A budget at its best is not a cage, but a compass, one that allows a person to orient themselves amid the constant noise of consumer temptation. Think of it as a form of economic cartography, a way of drawing maps that chart where your resources actually travel versus where you wish they would go. People who budget for the first time are often startled to discover how much of their spending is not rational but reactive, driven by impulses, moods, or subtle nudges from the environment. Behavioral economists call this present bias, our tendency to favor immediate gratification over long-term benefit. A budget acts as a deliberate interruption to this bias, a pause button that lets you ask, do I really want this now, or do I want something more later? Over time, that simple pause changes the way you make choices, not by denying pleasure, but by giving pleasure a hierarchy. Some joys are fleeting, others more sustaining. This perspective also illuminates the fact that budgeting is not purely defensive. Many beginners wrongly assume that budgets exist only to say no, to subtract, to shrink, but a deeper view reveals that budgeting is actually expansive. It creates the conditions under which your yes carries more weight. When you have carefully chosen where your resources go, you no longer feel guilty about spending. You enjoy with freedom because you know the essentials are secured, the future is respected, and the indulgence itself has been accounted for. In this way, budgeting is closer to architecture than accounting. It is about designing a structure within which life can flourish, rather than obsessively tracking every brick that went into it. The difficulty, of course, lies in beginning. To move from abstraction to practice requires discipline, but also humility. The recognition that one's memory, willpower, and instincts are often unreliable when money is at stake. That is why the first encounter with a budget can feel almost humiliating. It holds a mirror to your habits, exposing the small leaks you preferred to ignore. But this discomfort is not a punishment, it is an initiation. It signals the moment when you step out of financial adolescence, where money arrives and disappears mysteriously, and into financial adulthood, where you accept responsibility for directing its flow. Ultimately, the beauty of budgeting lies in this. It gives you back the authorship of your own story. Instead of being a character tossed about by circumstance, unexpected bills, persuasive advertisements, the constant drift of lifestyle inflation, you become the editor of your own narrative. Each dollar has a role, each choice a purpose, and gradually you discover that money is not simply something you earn and spend, but something you command. And in that realization lies the true power of a budget, not as a list, not as a spreadsheet, but as a philosophy of freedom.